astronaut Neil Armstrong first stepped on the moon with his left foot. Gene Cernan was the last man to walk on the moon in 1972.
Welcome to the Armstrong Air and Space Museum.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish. We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
The success of a manned moon landing was dependent on all the previous manned missions. Throughout the course of 2 years, Project Mercury had 6 successful launches of individual astronauts into Earth orbit. Following closely behind were Project Gemini's 10 manned missions. With crews of 2 astronauts each, the Gemini missions established their own astounding set of firsts, introducing pioneering spacewalks and spacecraft docking, revolutionary new feats to learn to work and live in space. The lunar orbital missions of Project Apollo demonstrated that it was possible to reach the moon and return, but it was up to the crew of Apollo 11 to prove that they could not only get there, but also land on the moon and return home. 3 astronauts, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, prepared to be tested like no humans had ever been before. Born on August 5, 1930, Armstrong began his NASA career in Ohio at Lewis Research Center. He joined the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics as an engineer and test pilot. This organization would eventually become the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA. As a research pilot at NASA's Flight Research Center in Edwards, California, he flew pioneering high-speed aircraft, including the 4,000-mile-per-hour X-15. Armstrong became America's first civilian astronaut in 1962. 4 years later, he was assigned as command pilot for the Gemini 8 mission, during which he performed the first successful docking of 2 spacecraft. Soon after connecting with the unmanned docking vehicle Agena, the spacecrafts began spinning out of control. The astronauts detached, but the spinning worsened. A thruster on the Gemini was faulty, and only the re-entry rockets could counteract the error. The mission was over after only 11 hours. That incident would further prepare Armstrong and NASA for the unknown of landing on the moon. Air Force Officer Edwin Buzz Aldrin, born January 20th, 1930 in Montclair, New Jersey, would accompany Armstrong to the lunar surface. Aldrin received a doctorate of science in astronautics from MIT, where he developed the mathematical formulas for spacecraft to rendezvous in orbit. In 1966, he and fellow astronaut James Lovell launched into space in the Gemini 12 spacecraft on a 4-day flight, which brought the Gemini program to a successful conclusion. Aldrin established a new record for spending almost 6 hours outside the spacecraft. Air Force officer Michael Collins was born in Rome, Italy on October 31, 1930, the son of an Air Force general. After first serving as a pilot for the Gemini 10 mission in 1966, he was selected as command module pilot for Apollo 11. While his crewmates would be on the lunar surface, he would have the distinction of being the most isolated human in history. Though the mission patches are traditionally designed by the crews collaboratively, Collins was the primary artist for the Apollo 11 patch. The olive branches represented the peaceful nature of the mission. The astronauts chose to omit their own names, symbolizing both the support of thousands of others working on the mission and the universal impact of their goal. Apollo astronauts trained for every second of their mission. They learned geology and prepared for every contingency, how to withstand G-forces, how to maneuver in low and zero-gravity conditions, and how to land the lunar module. The Lunar Landing Training Vehicle gave astronauts a rare, hands-on experience on Earth. Armstrong lost control of the trainer. He ejected only 100 feet off the ground and parachuted to safety. Training was crucial to prepare astronauts, but also proved to be more hazardous than working in space. Throughout the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo programs, NASA lost more astronauts on Earth than during launch or space flights. Flying to the moon is not as simple as it may sound. The moon orbits the Earth, and the Earth revolves around the sun. The Apollo spacecraft had to aim for where the moon would be after its 250,000-mile, 3-day journey from the launch site in Florida. The return journey required equally perfect precision and navigation to ensure a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. No moon landing would have been possible without a tremendously powerful rocket. Taking 6 years to construct, the Saturn V measured 363 feet tall. The 5 first-stage engines generated 7.5 million pounds of thrust. The crawler that carried the Saturn V from the vehicle assembly building to the launch pad was also an engineering marvel and built by the Marion Power Shuttle Company in Ohio. A million people surrounded the Cape to see, hear, and feel the liftoff.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal. 12, 11, 10, 9. Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engines running.
Roger, 11, we'll pass that on, and it's going to look like you're well on your way now.
About 3 minutes following launch, the Saturn V's first stage and launch escape tower were jettisoned. The second stage rockets were then ignited for 6 minutes. The second stage separated, and the third stage propelled the spacecraft into Earth orbit. After leaving Earth orbit, the command and service module separated from the third stage. It spun around to dock with the lunar module, encased within the third stage. The combined spacecraft continued toward its lunar destination.
Apollo 11, this is Houston. Can we understand that you are done?
The distance from the Earth to the Moon averages 238,857 miles. One would have to travel from Maine to Southern California 85 times to go the same distance. In just over 200 cubic feet, the size of a small bathroom, the astronauts dined, navigated, communicated with NASA, and prepared for the lunar excursion. Armstrong and Aldrin crawled through the tunnel into their new spacecraft, the Eagle. 3 days after leaving Earth, Apollo 11 reached the Moon. A rocket burn, lunar orbit insertion, secured the spacecraft in lunar orbit. The Eagle separated from the command and service module, Columbia, and began its descent to the surface of the Moon.
Eagle Houston, we see you on the stereo, over. Roger, Eagle, I'm done. Roger, Heinz, good luck. Eagle, Roger.